Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel Hayes. I'm 38 years old, and I want to be very upfront with you right at the start of this. I debated for a long time whether to share this story publicly. Not because I'm ashamed of any part of it, but because some parts of this are still complicated, and some of the people involved are people I still have to see at holidays. But I also think about my daughter Lily. She's 7, and one day she's going to be old enough to understand what happened and what it meant. And when that day comes, I want her to know her mom didn't just absorb it quietly and move on. So, here we go. 3 weeks after I was promoted to colonel in the United States Army, one of the highest ranks an officer can hold, earned by fewer than 3% of people who ever serve, my mother-in-law stood in her own backyard at her own charity gala, looked down at my 7-year-old daughter in a navy velvet dress, and called her a soldier's brat. And then she laughed. And the woman standing next to her laughed too, and my daughter's face, that open, proud, completely unsuspecting little face, shifted in a way that I will never forget for as long as I live. Now, I want you to stay with me here, because what I did next is not what you might expect. And what happened 3 weeks later, in front of well over 1,000 people, is absolutely, completely worth the wait. Trust me on this one. My name, before I got married, was Rachel Tanner. I grew up in Clarksville, Tennessee, which, if you've never been, sits right on the edge of the Kentucky state line about 45 minutes northwest of Nashville. Fort Campbell is right there. The 101st Airborne calls it home. When I was growing up, about a quarter of the kids in my school had at least one parent in the military. Camouflage in the grocery store was just Tuesday. Deployments were just the word adults used when someone's dad wasn't going to be at the Christmas recital. My own dad served. Army, infantry, 12 years before a knee injury ended it. My uncle did 2 tours in Vietnam. 2 of my cousins enlisted straight out of high school. Service wasn't an abstract concept in my family, it was the furniture. It was just part of the house. When I was 19 and halfway through my sophomore year of college at the University of Tennessee, my roommate convinced me to go to an ROTC information event on campus. She thought one of the officers hosting it was cute. I thought I was going to spend 90 minutes making small talk and then leaving. Instead, I talked to a recruiter named Captain Delgado for 25 minutes and left feeling like something had clicked into place. Like a door I hadn't known was there had just opened. I commissioned as a second lieutenant at 21. I walked across that stage in my dress uniform, and something in my chest went quiet in the best possible way. Like I'd been trying to find the right frequency my whole life and finally landed on it. I want to say something here that I mean completely sincerely. I was not an average officer. I don't say that to brag. I say it because it's relevant to the story and because I think women, especially women in the military, are trained to minimize their accomplishments in social settings. So I'm going to stop doing that for the next hour. I was ambitious. I was disciplined. I studied harder than almost anyone around me. I was not perfect. I made mistakes, I had hard evaluations, I had setbacks, but I climbed, steadily, deliberately, on merit. By the time I met my husband Marcus, I was 30 years old, stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and I had just been promoted to major. For anyone who doesn't follow military rank structure, major is 04. It sits in the middle of the officer ranks, significant enough that you've already proven something, but you're still climbing. I was on a track that very few people stay on. I met Marcus at a birthday dinner in Fayetteville for a mutual friend. He was a civilian, a civil engineer, worked for a firm out of Raleigh. He drove down for the weekend because he and the birthday guy had been friends since college. He was tall, quiet in that way that isn't standoffish, just still. Like he didn't need to fill every space with noise. I've spent my career surrounded by loud, dominant, performance-oriented people, and this man just sat across the table and listened. Actually listened. When it was his turn to speak, what he said was worth hearing. We dated for 8 months before I said out loud that I knew this was serious. He showed up consistently. He remembered the small things. He never once made my career feel like a problem to be managed. He proposed to me in the kitchen of my off-post apartment. Quiet, direct, completely him. I actually beat him to it by about 30 seconds. I'd been planning to ask him that same weekend, and he just moved faster. We got married at Fort Bragg the following spring. 60 people. An outdoor ceremony on a Saturday in April that was warm and slightly windy and genuinely the most peaceful day of my life. And 3 days after our honeymoon, I met Diane. I want to be fair to Diane Hayes. I want to say that right now and mean it, because I do understand that when your child marries someone in the military, there are real anxieties, deployments, danger, the instability of a life that moves every 2 or 3 years. I understand that a parent who loves their child might have complicated feelings about that kind of future. But Diane's issue with me had nothing to do with fear. I figured that out within the first 40 minutes of meeting her. Diane was from an old Charlotte family. Not extraordinary wealth, no private jets, no second homes in Europe, but the kind of comfortable, established generational money that shapes how a person moves through the world. She sat on 3 boards. She hosted an annual charity gala. She had a social circle of women who wore pearls to lunch on a Tuesday without irony. Her husband Charles had passed away when Marcus was in college, a good man by every account, soft-spoken, kind to everyone. Marcus had his father's temperament, I think, but Diane had raised him largely alone after that, and she had very clear ideas about the shape of the life her son deserved. And that life apparently did not look like me. The first dinner was pleasant enough on the surface. She asked questions. She smiled at the right moments. She told me she was so impressed by women who chose service. She used the word brave twice, and both times it landed just slightly off, like she was complimenting me on surviving something, rather than choosing something. And I noticed, but I let it go. First dinner. New family. Give it time. But there's a thing that certain people do, and I've learned to recognize it very well, where the actual message is always delivered from 3 degrees away. Never the bad thing outright. Always the thing adjacent to the bad thing, so that if you call them on it, you're the dramatic one. About 2 months after the wedding, Marcus and I were at Diane's house for Sunday dinner. The conversation turned to a mutual acquaintance who had recently left her career to stay home and raise her kids. Diane passed the bread and said very lightly, "There's nothing wrong with that choice. A career is just a career. Family is forever." Small pause. "Especially careers that keep you away from home so much." And she looked at me. Marcus went still beside me. I smiled, took the bread, and said, "The Army has given me everything I have, Diane. I'm grateful for it every day." She smiled back and said, "Of course, sweetheart." And that was that. On the surface. But that was the moment I understood exactly who Diane Hayes was, and exactly what kind of long game she intended to play. Here is the thing about sustained, low-level disrespect. It doesn't break you all at once. It works slowly. It's like water erosion. It's subtle, and it's constant. And you almost don't notice how much landscape has changed until you look back and realize the whole shape of the ground is different. For 6 years, Diane never once correctly described my rank. Not once. In 6 years. I went from major to lieutenant colonel during our marriage, and Diane described my career exclusively as, "Rachel does military things," or "Rachel works on the base," as if the details didn't warrant the space in her brain to retain them. She talked constantly about Marcus's friends and their civilian accomplishments. Derek just made senior partner. Jason bought a second property. Always in front of me. Always with that tone that wasn't quite pointed, but was. And the parenting comments. God, the parenting comments. They never came to me directly. They came through Marcus, like little dispatches from a different front. "Your mother mentioned she was worried about Lily not having consistency. Your mother said she hoped the school situation wasn't too unsettling for Lily. Your mother said she just thinks children need their primary parent present. Children need their primary parent present." I want to let that one sit for a second. Marcus always delivered these with the energy of someone trying to hand me something hot without burning either of us. He'd say, "I'm just passing it along. She means well." He'd say, "She's from a different generation. She doesn't understand the demands of your career." And I really genuinely tried to hear that, to give it space. To remember that Diane had grown up in a world where the shape of a woman's life looked very different. But there's a difference between not understanding something and not respecting it. And Diane never respected my career. Not for one day in 6 years. Lily was born 2 years into our marriage, completely unplanned, completely overwhelming, completely the most transformative thing that has ever happened to me, and I would not change a single second of it. She came out looking like Marcus, that same settled, measuring expression, but with my eyes. Dark brown. Already calculating. Being active duty military while raising a child is not a small thing. I won't pretend it is. There were mornings I cried in the car in the parking garage before a deployment because I couldn't let Lily see it. There were nights I was so exhausted from the field that I read her bedtime stories on a video call, 9,000 miles away, watching her fall asleep on a screen while I sat on a cot in a tent. I missed her first steps. I missed her preschool graduation. I missed a parent-teacher night in second grade and heard about it from Marcus over a shaky FaceTime call while I sat in a briefing room in Germany. There was one night, she was about 4, when Marcus told me she'd cried for an hour at bedtime asking when I was coming home. He said he'd told her soon. He said she'd asked, but how many sleeps is soon? And he didn't have an answer. I was in a forward operating base with spotty satellite internet, and I read that message in the middle of the night, and I just sat with it for a long time. Not crying, past crying, just sitting with the particular weight of a thing you can't fix. That's the part nobody talks about when they talk about military life. Not the danger, not the logistics. The specific, quiet, private grief of being loved by a small person who doesn't yet have the words to understand why you keep going away, and choosing to keep going anyway because you believe in the work, because it matters, because something in you is built for it, and carrying the cost of that choice every single day, every single missed moment, Diane knew about and cataloged, not confrontationally, never confrontationally, just archived, so that whenever the subject of parenting came up, there was always a gentle reference to Rachel's schedule, Rachel's deployments, Rachel's absences, said carefully enough to sound like concern, delivered with enough warmth to read as love. I brought it up with Marcus once. I sat him down and said, "Your mother's comments about my parenting have been accumulating for years, and I need you to know they're affecting me more than I've let on." He said, "She loves you, Rachel. She just worries." I said, "I understand that's what you believe. But hearing that she worries about my parenting, through you, repeatedly, doesn't feel like love. It feels like a verdict." He went quiet. He said he talked to her. The comments didn't stop. They just got quieter. And I think that's the part that stings the most when I look back now. Not Diane's behavior. Marcus's. The man I loved choosing the comfort of neutrality over the discomfort of advocacy, telling himself the middle ground was the kind choice, when actually the middle ground was just the easy one. But here is something I want you to understand about where this story goes, because this is important. I don't tell you that to make Marcus a villain. He isn't. He was a man who had been trained his whole life by his mother to smooth things over, to keep the peace, to believe that if you just wait long enough, the temperature will drop on its own. He was wrong, but he wasn't cruel. And one day, the right day, he would understand that. By the time Lily turned 7, I was a lieutenant colonel, which meant I was very, very close. Close to colonel. Full colonel. '06. The rank with the eagle insignia on the shoulder. The rank that fewer than 3% of military officers ever reach. The rank that, in a typical assignment, means you command at the brigade level, somewhere in the range of 3,000 to 5,000 soldiers. In September, 2 weeks after Lily's 7th birthday, I received official word. I was selected for colonel. I was sitting in my car in a parking garage at the Pentagon when I got the call. I just sat there for a minute after I hung up, hands on the wheel, not moving. 16 years. Every deployment, every missed birthday, every evaluation, every sleepless week in the field, Every time someone subtly suggested I was doing too much or not enough, or that the balance wasn't possible, 16 years of just putting one foot in front of the other and doing the work. And this was the return on all of it. I called Marcus first. He could barely speak. I called my dad, retired Army, never made it past staff sergeant. Proudest man I know. And he cried on the phone without saying a word for a long moment before he finally said, Rachel, Rachel, I am so proud of you. I didn't post about it on social media. I didn't announce it at dinner. I didn't bring it up with Diane. I don't seek recognition. That's not why I do this. You do the work because the work matters. The rank is a byproduct, not the point. Which meant, of course, that Diane still had absolutely no idea. Diane hosted her annual charity gala every fall, a fundraiser for a children's hospital foundation she'd been involved with for decades, a genuinely good cause and genuinely beautiful event. Black tie, string lights, 200 guests, a live jazz quartet in the backyard. Marcus and I had attended every year since we got married, and every year the experience was the same for me. Wear the dress, smile at the questions, survive the evening. But this year, Lily was finally old enough to attend for part of the evening. Diane had actually suggested it herself, said she wanted Lily to see the gala, to understand what giving back looked like. She wanted to show her granddaughter off to her friends. I thought that was sweet. I genuinely lowered my guard a little. Whatever my complicated feelings about Diane, she did love Lily. That was real. We arrived at Diane's house at 6:30. Lily was wearing a navy blue velvet dress she'd picked out herself from the store, turning in slow circles every few steps because she liked the way the skirt floated. She had this expression on her face like she knew the evening was going to be special. Diane greeted us at the door. She kissed Marcus. She crouched down and cupped Lily's face and said, Look at my beautiful girl. Then she stood and looked at me. Rachel, you look put together, put together. Not beautiful, not lovely, not even pretty. Put together, like I was a quarterly report that had been adequately formatted. I said, Thank you, Diane. Your home looks incredible as always. Because that was the script. It was always the script. The evening started well. The backyard looked like something from a magazine. The food was extraordinary. The jazz quartet was playing something slow and warm. Lily was perfect. She introduced herself to adults with a little handshake. She asked a gentleman about his work and actually listened to his answer. She ate exactly the right amount of the appetizers and was generally the most socially competent 7-year-old in the room. I was proud of her in the way that fills your chest up like a balloon. About 45 minutes into the evening, she wandered, the way kids do when they've been well behaved for as long as they can manage, and found herself at a display of tall floral centerpieces near the buffet table. She was touching the flower petals, gently, the way she does with anything beautiful. One of Diane's friends, a woman named Patricia, the kind of woman who seems to be performing the idea of warmth rather than actually feeling it, walked over and said in that particular voice that adults use with children they find mildly inconvenient. Careful, sweetheart. Those are very expensive. Lily looked up without being startled. She said, I know. They're beautiful. My mom says flowers are alive and you should be gentle with living things. Patricia tilted her head. How sweet. And what does your mom do, dear? Lily straightened up. I was standing about 15 feet away, partially behind a cluster of people, close enough to hear everything, far enough that she didn't know I was listening. My daughter straightened her small spine in her navy velvet dress and said with complete and total certainty, My mom is a colonel in the army. A small pause. Patricia looked across the room with a half-amused expression. One of those little exchanges between adults where a child has said something that adults find quaint. Diane had walked over by this point. She'd heard the exchange. And what happened next? I have replayed this so many times. Every single word, every single beat. Diane looked down at my daughter. My 7-year-old girl. And she said it lightly. Throw away, almost affectionate in tone, the way she always delivered the things that were meant to land underneath the smile. Well, that explains a few things. Military girls always have a certain roughness to them. It's not their fault. It's just what happens when you grow up around all of that. Patricia made a soft sound that was not quite a laugh, but not a laugh. And then Diane added, I want you to hear this exactly as it was said, because the tone is everything, she added, like it was almost a compliment. She's a little soldier's brat. It's charming, in its own way. Silence in that small circle. Lily looked up at her grandmother. I watched my daughter's face. I watched the smile fade. I watched the confusion settle in like weather. She didn't understand every word, but she understood the tone. She understood that something had been said about her that was not kind. Children always understand the tone even when the words are just out of reach. I set down my glass. I want to tell you what I did, because I know some of you are expecting something spectacular here. A confrontation. A scene. Raised voices. I didn't do any of that. I walked over quietly. I put my hand on Lily's shoulder and I said calmly, Lily, sweetheart, why don't you go find Daddy? I think he was looking for you. She nodded and went. Then I looked at Diane. Then at Patricia. Then back at Diane. I said very simply, I heard that. Diane's smile didn't drop. She said, Oh, Rachel, I was just being playful. You know how I am. I said, I do know how you are. And I walked away, not because I was afraid, not because I was afraid, not because I was uncertain, but because there is something they teach you, formally and informally, in the military, and I have believed it in my bones since I was 21 years old. You don't win battles by reacting in the moment. You win battles by choosing your ground. And here's what else they teach you, or what they try to teach you. And some people learn and some people don't. The most dangerous person in any room is the one who doesn't need the room to know how dangerous they are. Power that announces itself is usually the kind that's worried about being doubted. Power that doesn't announce itself, that just exists and works and accumulates, that's the kind that moves mountains. Diane had no idea who she was standing across from, and that night I decided that in 3 weeks she would. My ground was not Diane's backyard. My ground was Fort Bragg. And my ground was Fort Bragg. And my ground was coming to me. I found Marcus near the bar and pulled him aside. I told him exactly what I'd heard. Every word. No softening. No asking for his interpretation. His face went through 6 emotions in about 10 seconds. Disbelief, then anger, then something that might have tried to become an excuse if I'd given it space. I didn't give it space. I said, Marcus, I'm not asking you to fix tonight. I'm telling you what happened. And I need you to hear me clearly. I am done pretending this is anything other than what it is. He said, I'll talk to her tonight. I said, You've been saying that for 6 years. He looked at me. He didn't argue. We finished the evening. Diane was warm and gracious at the door when we left, kissed Lily on the head, said it was just lovely having us, as if the previous 2 hours had contained nothing remarkable at all. In Marcus's car on the way home, Lily was quiet for a while. She watched the streetlights go by. And then, in that small, careful voice children use when they're working something out, Mommy, what's a soldier's brat? The whole car went still. I reached back and found her hand in the dark. I said, It's a name some people use for kids whose parents serve in the military. She thought about it. Is it a bad name? I said, It's a word that small people use when they want to make other people feel small. But here's the thing about that, baby. Small people never can. She was quiet again. Then she said, very matter of fact, You're not small, Mommy. I said, Neither are you. I spent the rest of that drive watching the city blur past and thinking very clearly, very calmly, about exactly what I was going to do next. Before I tell you this part, let me tell you about something that had been scheduled for 3 weeks from that night. The Army was hosting a brigade change of command ceremony at Fort Bragg. This is one of the most formal traditions in military life. The incoming brigade commander, the new colonel, is officially handed command of the unit in front of the entire brigade, the senior leadership, the families, and the community. It is not small. In my case, the ceremony was expected to draw over 1,000 attendees. There would be the full brigade formation, over 3,000 soldiers in precise alignment. There would be two generals. They would be the Army Band, a formal receiving line, and a public reading of the incoming commander's record and decorations. My name would be said out loud in full, with every accomplishment listed in front of everyone. The ceremony was in 3 weeks, and I made a decision. I invited Diane. I invited her and her entire social circle. I want to be careful about how I describe my motivations here, because I think they matter. I was not trying to humiliate her. I wasn't engineering a dramatic public scene. That's not who I am, and it's not how I operate. But I was done being invisible in my own life. I was done being the background wife at Diane's events, the woman who did military things, the one whose career was treated like an unfortunate scheduling conflict. And my daughter had just been called a soldier's brat in a velvet dress. The invitation went through Marcus. I told him I wanted his mother and her friends at the ceremony. He looked at me for a long moment, reading my face carefully, and said, "You sure?" I said, "I have never been more sure of anything." He nodded, and then he said something I wasn't expecting. He sat down at the kitchen table and said, "Rachel, I've been sitting with what happened tonight and what it means in the context of 6 years. And I've been thinking about how I've handled or not handled the way my mother has treated you. And I need to say clearly I was wrong. I told myself that staying out of it was the diplomatic thing, that it was kindness. But I was making you absorb something you should never have had to absorb alone. And I'm sorry." I stood in that kitchen and looked at this man for a long moment. I said, "Thank you, Marcus. That means more than you know." He said, "I mean every word, and I want you to know I am going to be standing right next to you at that ceremony, as proud of you as I have ever been of anything in my entire life." I held it together for about 4 seconds before I started crying, which, for the record, is a personal best. October in North Carolina can be perfect. Cool, dry, that specific quality of light that makes everything look more vivid than usual. Fort Bragg, which you may know by its newer name, Fort Liberty, is not a small installation. It is one of the largest military bases in the world. When Diane's car came to the entrance gates and she saw the flags, the scale of it, the uniformed guards, I watched her face through Marcus's windshield as we drove in convoy, and I saw something shift in her expression. Not yet recognition, but the beginning of recalculation. The ceremony field was set, rows and rows of chairs, the stage, the brigade formation, 3,200 soldiers standing in absolute precision, the Army Band, senior officers from multiple commands, 2 general officers seated in the front row. Diane and her friends were escorted to the VIP section. Right up front, I saw her looking around, taking in the scale, counting the rows of soldiers, looking at the flags. I saw Patricia lean over and whisper something. I saw Diane nod, and for the first time in all the years I'd known her, she looked uncertain. Lily sat in the family section beside Marcus in her navy velvet dress, because she asked to wear it again. She said it was her lucky dress. I was in my Army service uniform, what civilians would call dress blues, the full formal presentation. 16 years of ribbons on my chest. Combat Action Badge. Legion of Merit. The Meritorious Service Medal, 4 of them, one for each major accomplishment the Army had seen fit to formally recognize. Every decoration on that uniform was a chapter. The ceremony began. The outgoing brigade commander spoke. The division commander spoke. Then the aides stepped to the microphone for the formal announcement of the incoming commander. He read my full name. He read my rank. Colonel, United States Army. He read my record. He said, Colonel Rachel Hayes has served the United States Army for 16 years. She has completed 3 combat deployments. She holds a master's degree in strategic studies from the Army War College. She has commanded at the company, battalion, and now brigade level. She has been awarded the Combat Action Badge, the Legion of Merit, and the Meritorious Service Medal. 4 separate awards. She is among fewer than 3% of officers to have achieved the rank of colonel, he said. Today, she assumes command of the 1st Brigade Combat Team. I walked to that stage. I took the brigade colors, the flags that represent command, that represent responsibility for every soldier in that formation, from the outgoing commander's hands. And in that moment, with the band playing and 3,000 soldiers watching and 2 generals on the stage and my daughter in the audience in her navy dress, I gave myself exactly 1 second to just feel it. All of it. I found Lily first in the crowd. She was on her feet, both arms in the air, clapping with her whole body, face completely open with joy. Pure, uncomplicated 7-year-old joy. No performance, no restraint. Just, that's my mom. I found Marcus. He was crying, openly. He didn't try to hide it. And then I found Diane. She was still seated, very still. Her face had gone through something I can only describe as a slow and complete reckoning, like watching someone solve a math problem they hadn't known was coming, and the answer was not what they expected. Her friends on either side were leaning together, whispering, glancing at the stage, glancing at her. I held those colors and I spoke. My remarks were not long. The military is not a culture of lengthy speeches. But I had written every word carefully, and I said every one of them exactly as I intended. I said, "Soldiers and families of the 1st Brigade, it is the honor of my life to assume command of this unit today. I want to speak to the families, because you are not secondary to this mission. You are the mission. You have sacrificed things that most people will spend their entire lives never having to understand. Time, stability, the simple, ordinary comfort of having someone home at dinner. I speak as a soldier. I also speak as a mother. My daughter Lily is 7 years old. She has grown up understanding that service means sacrifice. She has sat with me in airports at 4 in the morning. She has watched deployment bags get packed. She has waited. And she has never treated that waiting as something to be ashamed of, because it isn't. The children of military families are not defined by what they've been without. They're defined by what they've been given, a front row seat to what real commitment looks like, what real courage looks like. Not in a movie. In an actual life, their parents' actual life. I am proud, genuinely, completely proud to be their colonel. Pause. Strike hard. Strike first. And 3,000 voices came back at once. Strike hard. Strike first. The sound of it goes through you like something physical. After the ceremony, there was a reception in the adjacent hall. Families, handshakes, photographs, the slow dissolve from formal to human. I worked the room. I spoke with my soldiers and their families. I shook hands and heard names and made eye contact with every single person who approached me, because that is what you owe the people who follow you. Diane found me about 30 minutes in. Her friends were not with her. She walked toward me slowly, and she looked different from every other time I had ever seen her. The composure was still there. Diane never fully lost the composure, but something underneath it had shifted. She looked like a woman who had been handed a fact she wasn't prepared for and was trying to figure out what to do with it. She stopped in front of me. She said, "Rachel." I said, "Diane." She looked at my uniform, at the rank on my shoulders, at the decorations on my chest, the formal record of 16 years, right there at eye level. She said, and her voice was different. The polished social voice was gone. What was underneath? It was smaller and more honest. I didn't know. I didn't know the scope of what you'd built. I said, "I know." She said, I've never asked, have I? Not really." I said, "No, you haven't." She was quiet. I said, Diane, I need to say something to you, and I need you to receive it as one person talking to another, not as your daughter-in-law, not as Marcus's wife, just person to person. She nodded. Her eyes were bright. I said, what you said to Lily at your gala, calling her a soldier's brat, it hurt her. I watched her face. And Lily is a child who is proud of me, who has worked to be proud of me, even when being proud of me meant missing me. What you said to her was unkind, and she deserved better from her grandmother. Diane closed her eyes for a moment. She said, you're right. I know you're right. A pause. I've had certain ideas, for most of my life, about what stability looks like, what success looks like, what the right kind of life looks like for the people I love. And I've let those ideas make me unkind. To you and to Lily. For years. Another pause. I'm sorry, Rachel. I am genuinely sorry. I looked at her for a long moment. Did I believe her? I believed the shock was real. I believed the shock was real. I believed the shame in her face was real. Whether those feelings would translate into lasting change, I couldn't know yet. That was going to be a longer, slower project. But I accepted the apology. Not for her. For myself. Because I was done carrying it. I said, thank you for saying that. It means something. She said, I'd like to speak to Lily, if you'll let me. I'd like to apologize to her directly. I nodded. I called Lily over from where she was eating a cookie with complete dedication. Lily trotted over in her lucky navy dress, cookie in one hand, totally unbothered. Diane crouched down to her level, and her voice, when it came, was not polished. It was just a grandmother off script, trying to do the right thing. She said, Lily, I said something unkind to you at my party, and I've been thinking about it ever since. I'm sorry. You are a wonderful, brave, remarkable little girl, and you should be very proud of your mother. Lily looked at her grandmother with those dark, measuring eyes. She considered it for a moment. Then she said, completely seriously, I already am proud of her. She's the colonel. And she went back to her cookie. Diane laughed. A real laugh, not the social one I'd heard for 6 years. Something underneath that, something more honest. And honestly, I laughed too. This story doesn't end with a slammed door. It doesn't end with a scorched family and a satisfying silence. I want to tell you what actually happened, because I think the truth is more complicated and more worth telling than a clean ending. Diane and I did not become close friends. I'm not going to tell you we suddenly had the mother-daughter relationship I'd always wanted, because that wouldn't be true and you deserve the truth. There was too much accumulated history. Too many years of small, precise slights. That doesn't just dissolve because someone sees your rank insignia and feels ashamed. But she changed. Gradually. Quietly. Genuinely. She started asking questions. Real questions. Not polite surface ones. She asked about the brigade. She asked about what a change of command actually meant, what my day-to-day looked like, what the deployment cycle was. She came to a Fort Bragg family event the following spring, and she stood there watching the soldiers on the parade field and said to Marcus, quietly, she does this every single day. And Marcus said, she's been doing it for 16 years, Mom. The parenting comments stopped. Not because she was told to stop, because something in the way she saw me had shifted, and the comments didn't fit the picture anymore. And one evening, about 4 months after the ceremony, Diane said to me, unprompted, at Sunday dinner, while passing the salad, I told my book club about you. I showed them the photograph from the ceremony. I hope that was all right. I said, of course. She said, Patricia said she remembers meeting Lily at the gala. A pause. I told her Lily comes by her character honestly. She held my gaze when she said it, and I thought, okay, this is what change actually looks like. Not a single redemption moment, not a dramatic transformation. Just a woman who had spent 64 years living inside very small ideas about what mattered, deciding slowly, imperfectly, one conversation at a time, to get a little bigger. I can respect that. I genuinely can. A few weeks after the ceremony, Marcus and I sat on our back porch after Lily was asleep. It was cold enough for jackets. He had a beer. I had tea. The yard was dark and quiet. He said, "I've been sitting with the years I should have spoken up and didn't, thinking about what that cost you. And I want to say it clearly, not just once. You were never invisible to me, Rachel, but I acted like you could handle being invisible to everyone else, and that wasn't fair." I said, "No, it wasn't." He said, "I'm sorry." I said, "I know you are. I believe it. What matters now is that we both know what we're not going back to." We sat in the dark for a while. He said, "Can I tell you what I keep coming back to?" I said, "What?" He said, "The look on your face when you took those colors. You looked complete, like everything had found its right place." I thought about it. I said, "That's exactly what it felt like." He said, "I have never been more proud of another human being." I squeezed his hand in the dark and didn't say anything else because there wasn't anything left to say. Lily doesn't fully understand everything yet. She knows her mom is a colonel and that it matters because a lot of people salute me, which she finds endlessly funny. She knows that Grandma Diane said something unkind and then apologized and that things are better now. She'll understand more when she's older. What I want her to take from all of this, when she's old enough to look back at this story and feel the full weight of it, is not the ceremony, not the reveal. Not the look on Diane's face when the aide read my record out loud. What I want her to take is this: do the work. Not to prove something to people who've underestimated you. Not to wait for a day when they finally see it. Do the work because the work is yours, and it matters and it builds something real. And then one day, often when you're not trying, often in front of an audience you never planned for, the work speaks, all by itself, in a voice you don't have to raise, 3,000 soldiers at attention, while your daughter in a lucky navy dress cheers from the family section. That's the payoff. Not a speech, not a victory lap, not a moment of "I told you so." Just the truth, finally taking up all the space it was always owed. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who should have seen you, someone who looked right at you and decided you didn't count, I want you to know something. They were wrong, not in an inspirational poster kind of way, in a practical, provable, real-world kind of way. They were factually, verifiably wrong about you, and you don't have to perform your worth for them. You don't have to wait for their apology to know what you are. You already know. And sometimes when you least expect it, the world has a way of making sure they know it too. My name is Rachel Hayes. I am a colonel in the United States Army, and my daughter is absolutely, completely, gloriously not a brat. She is the colonel's daughter, and that means everything. If this story hits something real for you, I want to hear about it. Drop it in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better? Someone who had every opportunity to see you and chose not to? Tell me your story. I read every single one. And if you know someone who needs to hear this right now, someone who's been made to feel small by someone who was supposed to show up for them, share this with them. I'll see you in the next one.